actually try to say like, okay, hold on a second. Let's bring this a little bit closer to the here and now. Whatever these big grand transformational schemes are that you have in your head, how can I just think of something concrete that could just move what we've got a little bit, right? Instead of trying to, start over from scratch. Let's just try to apply whatever those concepts are, whatever that is, to what we already have, and see if that helps, right? And I think that that's definitely something that I've learned, right, is to sort of have a little healthy skepticism about some of the ideas that pop up into my head, because again, the reality is always more complicated than you think. And so if
Hey everyone, I'm one of your hosts, Kaylee Jakovics, and with me I have Holly Basta as well as Michael Graham. We have a very special guest today, Steve Wasick, the founder of InfoSentience. And our episode today is Leadership in AI. So we're excited to chat with you, Steve. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So let's get this conversation started. We'd love to hear a little bit about yourself. We'll get into InfoSentience in just a moment, but kind of tell us a little bit about you. We'd love our viewers to kind of hear where you're located, family, anything you like to do for fun.
Yeah. Oh, wow. All right.
Whatever you want to share.
I mean, I think my company's fairly interesting. I'm not very interesting, so this is a little bit of a surprise. But yeah, I think I'm in Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana, which is where IU is located, which is actually a little more interesting these days with their football team. But
Yes.
but yeah, I've taken sort of a weird path to get to being where I am as a tech founder. I actually graduated from the University of Hawaii as an English major. I was like trying to be a screenwriter for several years. I had a hamburger restaurant and ran a flop house motel in a small town in Idaho. And then I graduated from law school. So I've done a few random things.
Wow.
But now I've been doing this now actually for about 13 years, and really enjoying it. And I like Indiana. I came here somewhat by accident, but I do like it here. And
okay. So you didn't grow up in Indiana. You ended up in Indiana.
I ended up in Indiana. Yeah, I grew up
Yes.
in Long Beach, California, actually. So
Okay. Gotcha.
So I just wanted to back up for just a second. I just wanted to get a clarification. So were you running the hamburger joint while you were doing law school, or just sort of?
No, that was
give me the
that was in
overview there.
a town called Sandpoint, Idaho, which is a beautiful town. And I was running a hotel and a trailer park, and doing some real estate stuff. My father's in commercial real estate, so I always did real estate things growing up. And I was living out there with my best friend, and we just decided to open up a hamburger stand. We had no idea what we were doing, but it was a lot of fun. We didn't completely fail. We actually sold the business, and people liked it. But it
love
was
that.
it was it was I mean, it was more of a learning experience, and got some good stories out of it.
All
Yeah,
right.
we'll just leave it at that, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So lots of experience, lots of past careers. How did you end up with AI or AI solutions as kind of, I guess, maybe your passion or calling that you found?
Yeah, again, that was sort of by accident too. I mean, I was in law school. I was at Northwestern Law School. I was in my third year, and I was in a fantasy football league with some friends at the school. I was really busy, and I just noticed that I was hardly paying attention to the games that I was even playing, let alone knowing what was going on in the league. And I don't know, this is a little bit weird, but I really like sports, but I like reading about it more than watching it, for whatever reason. So um, I like the context, I like the storylines, I like the stats. And I just thought, wow, this would be interesting if you could cover my league, right, with my friends and what I'm doing in the same way that, human reporters cover the NFL. And so I got really seized by this idea. I thought it was a really cool idea, and I started working on it. I'd actually taken some programming classes in high school, and then I'd always just kept up with it. I actually started a software company when I was 19, which didn't go very well, but I knew how to program some, and so I just started doing it myself. and it just kind of it just kind of fed into itself basically, where I got more and more excited, and then I as I sort of struggled with all the difficulties that really come about when trying to think about what goes into good writing. It's a lot. Even just what goes into the basics of language is something that's incredibly complex, and we don't think about it because there's a lot of rules that we learn when we're like 4 or 5 years old that we just completely take for granted. As far as, it's like, oh yeah, of course you write it that way, or of course, you change the pronoun, or of course you don't talk about these
Right.
subjects back to back. It's just like things you that are just like breathing, right? But they're really complicated if you try to actually get a computer to do that. And so as I struggled through a lot of these different challenges, the solutions that I came up with in order to sort of accurately talk about fantasy football, I sort of realized that, hey, these are actually solutions that are a lot broader than just sort of the original use case that I thought of. So I was able to very fortunately get an early relationship with CBS Sports to have the fantasy product. It was really quite lucky
Wow.
that I got it, and we've been working with them ever since. And that gave us sort of um, the ability to start operating as a real business, and then add some other clients. But that's kind of the very top level story.
Wow, that is very cool. And I feel like what a lot of people would call you is an entrepreneur,
Very much
especially
so.
with, yeah, with your past. So, very cool. So what kind of, and you touched on it a little bit, what type of solutions do you provide at InfoSentience? And I did see something really cool on your website, which was, I think it was something about like, can you spot the bot or something
Oh,
like
yeah.
that? That was fun.
Yeah, I mean, people now are pretty familiar with generative AI. I tell people we've been doing it since before it was cool, right? But now people know about, so many things like ChatGPT and a lot of these LLMs that are able to create content with pretty minimal prompting. So we do the same thing, but we use a very different technology, and it has certain advantages because one of the things that people do notice as well with LLMs is that they are not always accurate. They can hallucinate. They also tend to have trouble with large data sets, right? You can't just say like, hey, here's, 20 gigabytes of data in a bunch of columns, like go to work. Whereas our system is able to handle all those things, right? So it can go through a huge data set, whether that's in finance or sports or healthcare, and essentially figure out what's important and then write about it just like you would like a good human journalist or human analyst to do. And we can do that in any field. Anytime you have structured data, essentially, our system can come in and create high quality, accurate content that can report on that. And our fantasy product is pretty well known. I mean, there's millions of people playing fantasy sports on CBS who get our content every week. But we also we cover live sports like the NFL, the NBA. We cover high school sports with Max Preps. That's a pretty big product that we have now, where we're covering almost every high school sporting event in the country. So this is, tens of thousands every single week, and we're doing, previews and player focused content and recaps and all sorts of things for them. But we also work with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which is a, very large commodities trading firm. Reporting on markets there. We've reported on stock markets. We have a healthcare client that we do work with. So it's pretty broad based, and I do think that it's been a good opportunity for us actually with a lot of these models that are out there, because people now at least know sort of the possibility space, but they're also now discovering some of the pitfalls that are out there with some of the alternative technologies. And we don't think that our technology is better, right? It's just different, and it has certain advantages and disadvantages. And we definitely think that there's a lot of spaces where having something that you can rely on 100% and that can work at huge scale, like millions of unique articles in an hour if you need it. That's also something that's pretty difficult to do with ChatGPT. So or these
Right.
other LLMs. So we have some advantages, and we're pretty happy with the position that we're in.
Now, you mentioned that there is a very broad application for this technology. Can you talk a little bit about what your strategic goals are for the company moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I know this sounds bad to say on a leadership podcast, but like we don't have really broad strategic goals because we're pretty small and we don't necessarily have a dedicated biz dev team. I mean, the team is mostly me, and a few, and so we just try to talk to people. Every use case is very different, right? And it's very hard from outside of a company to say, okay, we know for a fact that they have this particular problem. They have this type of data. It's structured in this way. They want to see it in this particular format when we're done with it. And so I've tried to take a more proactive approach in the past, and it generally hasn't worked very well. And so what I try to do is, and maybe this isn't great, but it's to be a little bit more sort of reactive, a little bit more flexible, right? Where it's just like, hey, let's try to get out there, talk to folks that we think would have potential use case, right? But it's always the devil's always in the details. And so I think that trying to sort of see ahead, which I know good business leaders are supposed to do, is something that either it hasn't worked because that's just genuinely how it is, and it's tough to do it that way, or it's my own personal failings in having the vision to think strategically. But whether it's one of those two things, that's kind of where I'm at, where it's more just like we just try to have short intro conversations, see if we can latch on to something that makes sense, and then kind of take it from there.
So it's evolving. It's constantly
Yes,
evolving.
yes, yeah,
And
yeah,
it
and I
sounds like
think
you're very adaptive too, that you can pivot because based on the market. I mean, I know we were talking about this just before the podcast. Again, congratulations on your 13th anniversary for your company. That's
thank you.
amazing. Like you said, you started in AI before it was cool, and you've seen quite a bit of change in just the last pretty much since 2020, and how AI has now become a talking point for every company out there. And so congratulations on that. But it seems like to me, based on that question that Holly just gave you, you have to be adaptive, and you have to be pivotal to be able to meet the market changes because it is ever changing now. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of the struggles that we've had, I think have been mirrored by a lot of companies that are trying to, ride this wave of AI, right? Where they're, hey, you could kind of, it's that old adage about like, oh, what's your market? Like everything, right? Like where they say, okay, if you say your market's everything, it's actually nothing. And I think that there's, something to that within the generative AI space where we've kind of been through the battles in the past where we say we've created an analyst in a box, and that's true from a technical standpoint. Like literally, if you have any structured data, we can create content for you. But there's a lot of issues that pop up in terms of like scale, in terms of how actually people will use it, right? Where you can create something that looks kind of gee whiz, right? Like as a product demo, where you say, oh, this is kind of cool, but then do people actually use it? Like, do you have enough scale, right? Where it's like it
Right.
actually makes sense for us to build out all the intelligence that we need and the integrations and everything else. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of, and this kind of goes back to sort of the strategic aspect of it, where there's so many of these issues that crop up that go from, in going from this is a cool gee whiz demo to actually this is a product that people will pay for consistently.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen, I think, other companies struggle with this within the generative AI space for sure.
Steve, can you share some of the impact that AI has had with some of either your clients or organizations that you've dealt with in the past?
Yeah, I think the sort of easiest places to point to are some of our more public facing projects, like within fantasy sports, for instance. I mean, these are we create these recaps, and they get sent out to CBS fantasy sports players, managers, and these have the highest email open rates of anything that CBS sends out to their users,
Wow.
and have consistently had that for more than 10 years now. For Max Preps, this is something where they're seeing tremendous engagement from players because essentially there was no or very, very little coverage, right, of some of these games on their site. And obviously, these games, they really matter to the people who are playing it, even if they're at a smaller school or they're not a D1 college recruit. I mean, they're trying their best and they're pulling off an amazing comeback, or they're getting revenge over last season's big loss, or all these things.
Right.
That their stories are compelling to the people who are playing and their parents. And so being able to see that has made a big difference. And they've told me and showed many examples of students responding to it, whether that's on social media or, one of the people who works at Max Preps actually coaches a girls softball team, and she says that, the players love, when they get mentioned, when they get surfaced, right? Like their exploits, and they send it around to their friends. And so that's something that I think has been really fun for us.
Very cool. I mean, it's amazing that you got into AI before now. That's all anyone ever talks about.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to be talking with a professional that has been, involved with AI for years and years, right? I'm curious, just as you as a professional, what type of changes have you seen in the industry over the last year? I know it's constantly changing, so I'm just interested to hear what you have to say about that.
I honestly, I'm not sure I have any particular insight, special insight into the sort of AI world at large, just because we're sort of this weird subset in some ways, because we have this different technology. We're in the Midwest, right? We're not, out on the coast where there's a lot of fluff, a lot of froth, right? Of just money and expectations and big talk, right? Like that's not necessarily where we're at. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely interesting from just a biz dev side of things that we don't have to explain what we're doing, right? And there's definitely a more of an interest to talk to us, right? Because as you said, it's such a buzzword and people care about it so much. I mean, I think I was just
Right.
looking at something today from Intel where basically the reason the CEO got canned was because they weren't making enough progress on AI, right? And that's going to be something that people in the C-suite are going to be held accountable for. How are you managing the transition, right? So I think that that's something that certainly helped us, right?
Hmm.
But as far as yeah, the general space, I don't know. I mean, I wish I knew, wish I could say something, but I honestly don't think I know more than anybody else in terms of just there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and how it's all going to work out is it's going to be a big story.
Hey, Steve, have you found that people are talking about AI now? Again, I'm not trying to date, how old you are or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure that you probably remember that when the internet, like back in the early
Oh yeah.
90s, and people were talking about the World Wide Web and what was that, and everyone was talking about the World Wide Web, but they really didn't know what the internet was or how it was going to be used, and and then you look, here it is 2024, and we just take it for granted that it's an integral technology in our lives. Having seen AI evolve, especially over the last decade, are you seeing that more people are more educated about AI and are willing to talk to you, especially because of your company's um, uh, community engagement and being able to bring people together? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think to me it's following a pretty traditional hype cycle, right? Which is, this thing comes out and impresses everybody, and then everybody's like, this is going to change everything. And then again, when you get into implementation, it's a lot trickier, right? And so things tend to then feel like it's very disappointing. But then, just like you mentioned with the internet, I mean, this happened then, right? Where it's like, hey, this is going to change everything, and all these companies got these crazy valuations, and then a bunch of them went broke, and then people are saying, oh, it's not actually going to be that big of a deal. It's a fad, and that's definitely not the case, right? Like the internet really was. Everybody was right about the internet being incredibly important and that it was going to change, aspects of culture and business and everything. And I think people are 100% right about that with AI. And maybe, I mean, I certainly think that AI is going to be more important than the internet. I think it's going to be the most important thing that's ever happened in human history, to be honest. And I think that we shouldn't lose sight of that, because when there are sort of setbacks and things that that don't seem as transformative in the next few years, which I think is inevitable. I do think that, the underlying technology is going to continue to improve and get better and better and better. And as people whether it's organizations like businesses or just individual people, start to understand how AI fits into their lives or into their processes at a business, it's going to really, really take off.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to, leadership. You're an entrepreneur. You've owned multiple businesses, and now into AI. But, can you kind of walk us through either the journey, the inspiration, or any pivotal moments that you had throughout your lifetime that helped kind of push you to be that leader?
I can't point to anything in particular. I think just like you said, I'm an entrepreneur. That's just kind of, it's in my blood. There's a lot of I'm in like a incubator space
Yeah.
in Bloomington, a really nice space, and there's a lot of these programs that are trying to encourage people to be entrepreneurs. And honestly, I can't get into any of them because I'm like, why would you encourage people to be entrepreneurs? Like, it's not actually a good thing to do for an individual. I think it's great for society, but I would never encourage anybody to be an entrepreneur ever. I would help them if they made the decision, but I honestly feel like if you don't feel compelled to do it, you
Right.
shouldn't do it because it's awful. Like, it's just
It's a
awful. Like,
lot
I
of
don't know how
work.
else to put it. Like, and
A
things have
lot of
gone
work.
relatively well for me, and I've had a good team. I've had some good luck. We've been relatively financially successful. But it's really, 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 really difficult. And so I just feel like if it's not something that you absolutely need to do, you should do it. Um, and that's just kind of how it's always been for me. I've just kind of taken it as a given that, like, oh, I'll just do something that I want to do. And I've done that, to my detriment in a lot of ways. But that's just, it's always been how I felt. And so
Yeah.
I don't think that there's anything that I can necessarily point to,
Pinpoint.
um,
Yeah.
that sort
Yeah,
of put
but
me on this path.
the moment we started talking, I'm like, he's an entrepreneur. I just know it. Everything you were saying at the very beginning.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So while we understand that you don't want to influence anyone to become an entrepreneur, were there any mentors or role models that sort of set your path on this journey?
No, actually, not
he's
really.
just
I
a
mean, I've had
born
some,
leader.
what's that?
I said, you're just a born leader.
No, I don't know about that. I think I mean, I think I should have sought out more, when I was younger. I think I just kind of and I think my grandfather was an entrepreneur. I shouldn't say that. Like, my grandfather, my uncle, they both started businesses and they helped me out. I almost say no because I feel like I didn't do enough to listen to people, and I did seek out some guidance, but I didn't seek it out enough. And that's probably even still the case. So I can't point to anybody in particular, sort of in the past where I could say, oh, this person, really changed how I thought about things. But I've tried to be much better at that, over the years. And of course, just about anybody you talk to who's in the space will have at least something that's going to help you out. I mean, everybody, I think there's that Emerson quote, maybe, where it's like, every man is better than me in some way, and that's how I learned from him or something. And that's definitely true. And in the entrepreneur space, I think one of the things that I found is just the level of complexity is really off the charts, in terms of the things that you have to do, or it's every single aspect of life, essentially, where you're talking about, whether it's biz dev, whether it's managing people, product, like dealing with disappointments, dealing with financial issues. I mean, I don't understand how certain people even achieve the success that they do. People who just start companies and 3 or 4 years later they have an exit. I mean, it's really remarkable, and I know that they're obviously doing things that are much better than I am. But it's so I would say, to the extent that anybody starting off being an entrepreneur, is to just listen to everybody, read books, do what you can, right? Like, to to just try to gather as much information as you need, because no matter how much you have, it's not going to be enough, right? Like, you're going
Yeah.
to have to just learn from the school of hard knocks, right? Like, the
Yeah.
things that are just, they're too complicated to understand
Yeah.
from just sort of looking at a distance and seeing it. It just has to actually happen to you. You actually have to get hit by it for it to really understand what to do about it. So definitely I would lean into mentors and good advice more than I did.
Well, I was going to say, in particular, I think with emerging technology, you really have to have a little bit of space for that learning curve because you're doing things that haven't been done before. And so there is no playbook. There is for sports, there's no rule book.
Yep.
So it makes it very different. And that's where I think the ability, as Mike pointed out, to pivot and to evolve is very important as a leader and an entrepreneur, especially in an AI generative technology based company. Maybe you will write the playbook for others coming down the line.
I hope so. I
Steve, I do have a question for you. You mentioned about how you would have leveraged seeking out mentorship earlier on, and maybe that would have alleviated some of the pain of being hit a
yeah.
number of times. What would you say that what other piece of advice would you give to like a young entrepreneur other than don't do it? If they were like, I'm going to do it, Steve, what would you recommend I do other than seek out mentorship? What would be another piece of advice you'd give them?
I would say start small and start in a space where you have real knowledge and some sort of competitive advantage. I mean, I think that I kind of just jumped into this just because I had this particular idea. But I think that anytime you have domain knowledge, that's where you're more likely to be able to differentiate yourself really quickly, right? Because like if you have a space, like I think it would be great to work somewhere, first in some sort of in a space, and then you're developing contacts, right, that you could use as your first, sort of test clients. And most importantly, you're developing particular knowledge, of something like, hey, I know, the best thing would be like if you're working at a company and there's some process that just terrible, right? Where you're like, man, if I could do X, like my job that I know exists, right? Like I'm not speculating on it. I know exactly what happens in this space, exactly where the problem is, and I know exactly how to solve it. That is such a better starting point, right? Than again, trying to sort of foresee what the problem is going to be. I talked about having some difficulties in my particular industry, but I think that this is at least somewhat widespread, right? It's not just me. It's very difficult to sort of from the outside say, you know what companies really struggle with is X. I'm sure of it, right? Like, because wouldn't that be difficult? It's like sometimes it's just not, or they just don't care about it, or whatever. And so if you can have a very specific idea, from your own experience of what a problem is, I think that that's the best way to start a company, right? Is to have that foundation from experience as opposed to just kind of having an idea, right? Like ideas are one of the things my uncle did tell me is that it took me a long time to come to terms with this is he was like, ideas are close to useless. And I was like, oh, come on. Like I was really young at the time. I was like, no, you can have great ideas. And it's like, it's totally true. It's all about execution. And even the concept of an idea is very different if it's something that's concrete that's coming from your experience versus just sort of something that you thought of in bed one day.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah, and having that foundation in place and kind of what you're saying, learning early on in kind of where the space that you want to be and understanding, kind of perfecting not only the foundation but the process. It goes a long way. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And that leads me to ask, I guess, and I'm curious too in the industry that you're in with AI, in your company, what were some of the challenges that you saw maybe early on in your career, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was a little bit different from our journey was trying to solve a pretty big technical challenge, which just to dive into sort of our timeline a little bit deeper, we got this very lucky contract with CBS Sports. We were doing work that I think compared very favorably to our competitors. And I had this idea, because I think that they're
You gotta
valuable, right? I was like,
execute.
well, yeah, I was like, yeah, we're doing a good job, but I had this sort of more general idea that could be much more powerful and sort of be a foundational piece of generative AI and general AI. And I thought it would take me 6 months, and it took me 8 years. And that entire time, I thought I was like close, which made it even worse, right? So there, that I think, in looking at the challenges from my company, maybe this is a little bit different than most, but we just had this almost this like white whale that I was after, and I couldn't stop. And because again, I thought I was close the whole time, even though I had to start over from scratch, literally start over from scratch, brand new code base 7 different times. And I think that really, it definitely set back my company's growth, because there was a lot of times I was like, well, let's not even pursue new clients because we got to get the tech stack finished, first. And we're so close, right? Like, I mean, I was saying this, a year in, 2 years in, right? And I was many,
We're
many
almost
years, a
there.
half a decade away from actually finishing. I mean, we did actually finish, and I think that's given our technology a fantastic foundation and allows us to do some things that nobody else can do in the space. So I'm proud of what we were able to accomplish as a team. But that, I think, in terms of my own company history, um, that's been the biggest challenge. Was there was this sort of like hiatus where we were sort of a research project disguised as a company for many years. We have come out of the other side, thank goodness. I mean, we really could have just had to close up shop, had we not been able to sort of keep the lights on
Yeah.
while that whole process was taking place. Um, but yeah, at least any
It's made
challenges for
you
the company, that's got
stronger.
to be first front and center for us, at
Yeah,
least.
yeah, it's helped. I know it was probably a struggle over years. You're saying, we're almost there, guys. And then, 8 years later, but it's definitely made your process, that foundation, stronger now, so you can thrive and go after, more clients and bring on more business. So you have that solid process, which is something we value at the company I work for, which is Mojo. So thank you for sharing that.
It speaks volumes about you and your company that you didn't release it just for the sake of releasing it and then trying to fix it with a bug or a fix afterwards. You actually released it when it was ready and ready to go to market. So that speaks volumes on your dedication to make sure that it was going to work before releasing it to the public. So kudos to you on that.
Thank you.
And I'm also curious, Steve, during those times where you just weren't sure and you were just sort of waiting and in limbo, talk about how you stayed motivated during that time in your leadership journey.
I mean, it was more just being out over on the tightrope, and just knowing there's no net, right? So it's just, it either was going to work or it was going to fail, and there was no soft landing, right? I guess that was the motivation, was just I didn't want to fail.
And then, was there anything that you did during that time period to help yourself grow and evolve into where you are now?
I mean, I hope so. I mean, I think, I mean, in general, like, I think I wouldn't do that again, because I think actually I'm glad that we got to where we are, but really it would have been better to take a more incremental approach to what we had, and essentially almost that's somewhere where we did end up. Like the final version was actually closer to the first version than I would have thought, right? Like there was some real substantive improvements, but there, had I taken an incremental approach, not only would it have been better from a biz dev standpoint because we wouldn't have felt like we were completely transforming everything, but it actually would have been better from a technology standpoint. I would have gotten to the finish line faster had I actually sort of built off of what I had. So I'm quite sure that I mean, I'm literally knocking on wood because I don't trust how stupid I am sometimes, but I definitely think that I wouldn't, if I had some amazing idea, oh, this is going to be transformational, blah, 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 blah. I don't think that I'd certainly be less likely to follow up on it, right? Like, because I would actually try to say like, okay, hold on a second. Let's bring this a little bit closer to the here and now. Whatever these big grand transformational schemes are that you have in your head, how can I just think of something concrete that could just move what we've got a little bit, right? Instead of trying to, start over from scratch. Let's just try to apply whatever those concepts are, whatever that is, to what we already have, and see if that helps, right? And I think that that's definitely something that I've learned, right? Is to sort of have a little healthy skepticism about some of the ideas that pop up into my head, because again, the reality is always more complicated than you think. And so if you're trying to think in these big, broad terms, whether that's technological transformation or biz dev or anything really. It's always good, I think, to question just how that's going to actually react with reality, right? Because it's probably not going to react the same way you think. And so, like, the more you can bring it into something that's iterative, that's concrete, I think the better off you typically are going to be.
I love having someone that is more technical on our show because you just see a completely different side. So thank you for sharing. We have just a couple minutes left. So first, before we ask kind of our final wrap-up questions, I do want to know how, if someone is interested in your services or getting in touch with you, how can they go about doing so?
Sure. So, we have a website. You can request a demo on the website. I'll just give out my email address. I don't care. It's Steve Wasick, my name, at InfoSentience.com. And so, yeah, you could just email me, but we definitely are available in terms of if you have a problem that has scale, right, where you have a lot of reports or anything where you would, whether it exists now and you want to save money, or whether it's something that doesn't exist because it wouldn't be feasible to do with human beings. Any sort of writing or reporting on data that needs to be done at scale, then our system can do it basically instantaneously. It can do it 100% accurate. We can add graphics. That's something we've been working on a lot, is adding charts and tables and even videos that are auto-generated, everything like that. So it's pretty powerful technology. And so if you have any interest, I'd love to talk to you.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. Holly or Mike, do you have any other questions or anything that you want to learn from Steve today?
I feel like we should hear from Mike again.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I agree with you, Kaylee. It's always good to know that you're in the right room when you know that you're not maybe the smartest person in the room. And I felt with Steve explaining his company and his industry, I felt like I was learning the entire podcast. So again, Steve, thank you. I really gain a lot of, people use value as a term all the time, but I really did feel like I got a lot from you today.
Oh, yeah, well, I did too.
This has been really fun, so thank you.
I really loved the point that you made about incremental change, and I think that's so important, especially when we're talking about this topic. As I noted, when you're talking about emerging and evolving technology, sometimes people, I feel like, have this unrealistic expectation that it's just going to happen so quickly, and as you mentioned, it takes time, and not every path is completely direct. So I really liked your breakdown of that, and I think that's important for every business owner and entrepreneur to consider, is that you may not get that rapid success that you think you're envisioning in the future. It may be more incremental, and as you figure things out and the technology evolves, those increments can be really big leaps forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Holly. And Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. Mike, it was great to have you as one of our co-hosts virtually as well. Steve, you brought a lot of value, and thank you again for joining us.
So that's all for this episode of The Diligent Leader. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got many more episodes coming up, scheduled and planned. So don't forget to like, save, and share this episode, especially if you found something valuable in our conversation that you think you could share with other business owners or people that are thinking about starting a business, or maybe they're established entrepreneurs who just want to learn more and kick the tires a little bit. So we love having these discussions with our guests. So I want to thank you all for joining us again for this episode of The Diligent Leader. I'm Holly Basta, here with Kaylee Jakovics, my co-host.
See you next time, guys.